Not everyone seeks power willingly. Sometimes the journey to it begins when there is no other choice left. The wind across the Peak District was not merely cold. It was a physical weight, a heavy, damp hand pressing down on the heather and the jagged spine of the earth. It smelled of wet stone, decaying bracken, and the peculiar ozone-sharp scent of impending failure. Hermione Granger adjusted the strap of her beaded bag, her knuckles white where she gripped the leather. She didn't look to her left. She didn't need to. The magical tether binding them ensured she was hyper-aware of his presence. It was a phantom sensation, like a hook buried behind her navel, tugging incessantly if he drifted more than 5 paces away. Draco Malfoy. He was walking beside her, silent as a ghost. The crunch of his dragon-hide boots on the gravel was the only proof he hadn't dissolved into the grey mist. "You're dragging your feet," Hermione said, her voice snatched away by the gale almost instantly. She didn't shout. She simply projected her annoyance. It was safer than projecting her fear. "I am pacing myself, Granger." His voice came back, low and drawling, carrying that familiar aristocratic exhaustion. "Unlike you, I do not find joy in marching toward my own humiliation." Hermione stopped. The tether pulled taut, vibrating in the air between them like a plucked violin string. She turned. Draco stood amidst the swirling fog, his silhouette sharp and monochromatic. He was wearing a long black coat with the collar turned up, framing a face that had lost the softness of boyhood, but gained the sharp, brittle beauty of something broken and glued back together. His hair was longer now, falling into eyes that were the color of the storm clouds above them, grey, turbulent, and utterly guarded. "It's not humiliation, Malfoy," she snapped, though the wind stung her eyes. "It's a sentence. For both of us." The ministry was clear. The ley lines are fractured. We are the only two with a magical signature compatible enough to fix them. If we don't reignite the cairn of unity, the magic in Britain continues to bleed out. Do you want to be a squib by Christmas? Draco's jaw tightened. A muscle feathered in his cheek. He looked away, staring out over the bleak, rolling hills. "Better a squib than this," he muttered, though the words lacked conviction. They were lying. Both of them. This wasn't just about magic fading. It was about penance. Hermione, the golden girl, who couldn't sleep without dreamless sleep, who jumped at the sound of dropping cutlery, needed a purpose to keep the memories at bay. And Draco. Draco was currently awaiting the final verdict of the Wizengamot. This mission was his probation, his leash. "Let's just get to the stone," Hermione said, her voice softening, not out of kindness, but out of fatigue. "The readings say the resonance is strongest at the summit." They resumed the climb. The silence between them was thick, filled with unsaid words and years of accumulated bitterness. Every step was a negotiation. If Hermione moved too fast, the magical bond burned hot, a warning singe against her skin. If Draco lagged, a wave of nausea washed over them both. They were forced into a grotesque parody of partnership, physically shackled by a magic that demanded intimacy from two people who preferred war. The path steepened. Rain began to fall, icy and sharp. Hermione slipped on a patch of wet slate. Her arms flailed, seeking purchase on the empty air. A hand shot out. Long, cold fingers wrapped around her forearm, hauling her back to balance with surprising strength. For a second, just one heartbeat, they were close. Too close. Hermione could smell him. He didn't smell like the dungeons anymore. He smelled of rain, expensive parchment, and something bitter like wormwood. She looked up, breathless, and found him staring down at her. His grip was tight, bruising. His eyes were wide, the pupils blown, and she felt a sudden, violent jolt in her chest. Not her heart, but the magic. It surged between them, a sudden flare of heat in the freezing rain. It wasn't warm, it was searing. Draco released her as if he'd been burned. He stepped back, wiping his hand on his coat, his face twisting into a sneer that looked painful to maintain. "Watch your step, Granger. I have no desire to carry your corpse down this mountain." "I didn't ask for your help," she lied, her pulse hammering in her throat. "The magic didn't give me a choice," he retorted, turning his back to her. "Come on. The sooner we finish this, the sooner I can get away from you." They reached the summit 20 minutes later. The cairn of Unity was less impressive than the legend suggested. It was a circle of standing stones, ancient and weathered, covered in lichen that glowed with a faint, dying luminescence. In the center lay a flat altar stone, cracked down the middle. The air here hummed. It was a low frequency that vibrated in Hermione's teeth. She checked her wand, though she knew it was useless for the ritual. This required raw channeling. "All right," Hermione said, trying to sound like the confident prefect she once was. She approached the altar. "You know the instructions. We have to place our hands on the stone, simultaneously. We have to channel our cores into the fissure and harmonize." Draco stood at the edge of the circle, looking at the stone with profound distaste. "Harmonize," he repeated flatly. "With you?" "Yes, Malfoy. With me. And if I refuse? Then the magic collapses and we likely die from the backlash. Or you go to Azkaban. Take your pick." Draco let out a harsh, dry laugh. He walked to the opposite side of the altar. The stone was waist-high, separating them, yet bridging them. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time that day. He took in her wet, frizzy curls, the dark circles under her amber eyes, the stubborn set of her chin. "Fine," he whispered. "Let's get this over with." "On 3, Hermione said. She peeled off her gloves. Her hands were trembling. She told herself it was the cold. 1. Draco removed his black leather gloves, revealing pale, slender hands. His left forearm was covered by his sleeve, hiding the mark, but Hermione knew it was there. 2. They locked eyes. Hermione built her mental walls. She was good at this. She would give the magic her power, but she would not give it herself. She thought of arithmancy equations, of library categorizations, of anything logical and cold. She saw Draco's eyes glaze over slightly. Occlumency. He was doing the same. He was retreating into his manner of the mind, locking the doors, barring the windows. 3. They slammed their hands onto the wet, mossy stone. At first, there was nothing, just the cold, wet rock under her palms. Then, the pull began. It started in the marrow of her bones, a dragging sensation, as if the stone were a vacuum drinking her strength. She gasped, trying to push more magic into it, trying to force the ignition. Across the altar, Draco hissed, his head bowed, his shoulders tense. "It's not working," he gritted out through clenched teeth. "It's blocked." "Push harder," Hermione commanded, closing her eyes, visualizing a stream of pure white light. "I am." The air around them began to distort. The wind died, replaced by a deafening silence. The hum in the stone grew to a shriek. Hermione felt a foreign presence brush against her mind. Cold, slippery, sharp. It was Draco's magic. It felt like steel and ice. She instinctively recoiled, shoving her mental shields up higher, blocking him out. "Don't!" Draco yelled, his voice strained. "Granger, let me in!" "No!" She panicked. If he got in, he would see. He would see the nightmares, the fear, the crushing loneliness. She pushed him back with a mental shove. The reaction was instantaneous. The altar stone didn't glow. It screamed. A shockwave of red and black energy exploded from the fissure where their magic met. It wasn't a harmonious blend. It was a collision of two impenetrable solids. Hermione was thrown backward. The force lifted her off her feet and slammed her into the wet earth 5 yards away. The air was sucked out of her lungs. "Granger!" She scrambled up, coughing, tasting copper. The world was spinning. Draco had been thrown in the opposite direction. He was pushing himself up on one arm, his other hand clutching his chest. His face was ashen, his eyes wide with genuine terror. Between them, the altar stones smoked. The crack in the center had widened. Hermione crawled to her knees, her hair plastered to her face. She felt sick, hollowed out. What? What was that? Draco staggered to his feet, swaying. He looked at his hands. They were shaking uncontrollably. "Rejection," he rasped, his voice trembling. "Absolute rejection." He looked at her, and the occlumency walls were gone, shattered by the blow. For a moment, Hermione saw the raw, bleeding panic underneath. "You blocked me," he accused, his voice rising. "You shielded yourself." "You were doing the same," Hermione shouted back, the adrenaline turning into anger. "I could feel your occlumency. It was like touching a frozen wall." "Because I don't trust you," Draco roared, the sound tearing through the misty quiet. "I don't trust you inside my head, Granger. You think I want you seeing everything? Then we're dead." Hermione stood up, ignoring the pain in her ribs. "We're dead, Malfoy, because the scroll didn't say provide power. It said resonate. It demands honesty." The word hung in the air between them. Honesty. Draco stared at her, his chest heaving. The rain poured down, soaking them to the bone, but the tension between them was hot enough to steam. "Honesty," Draco repeated, the word tasting like poison in his mouth. He took a step toward her, his expression twisting into something desperate and angry. "You want honesty? Fine. I hate being here. I hate that my life depends on the girl I tormented for 7 years. And I hate..." He stopped, his throat working. "You hate what?" Hermione challenged, stepping closer, drawn by the tether, drawn by the conflict. Draco looked down at her, his silver eyes dark. "I hate that you're the only thing making me feel anything other than numb." Thunder rumbled overhead, shaking the ground. Hermione stood frozen, the rain dripping from her nose. The confession was sharp, unintended, and confusing. Draco seemed horrified by his own words. He stepped back, the mask slamming back into place, but it was crooked now, imperfect. "We can't do this today," he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "The magical core is unstable. If we try again with these barriers, it will kill us." "We can't leave," Hermione whispered. "The bond won't let us separate." "Then we wait," Draco said, turning to look at the small, dilapidated shepherd's hut at the edge of the clearing. It was the only shelter for miles. "We wait until we can stop lying to ourselves." He looked back at her, and the air crackled, not with magic this time, but with a terrifying electric awareness. Or until we kill each other," he added. He walked toward the hut without waiting for her. Hermione watched him go, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The tether tugged at her, demanding she follow. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering violently, not from the cold, but from the sudden, terrifying realization that the most dangerous part of this journey wasn't the magic. It was him. The shepherd's hut was less a shelter and more a pile of stones that had simply given up on being a wall. The roof, a patchy thatch of rotting straw and slate, groaned under the assault of the gale. Inside, the air was stagnant, smelling of old soot, damp wool, and the metallic tang of their own discordant magic. Hermione sat on a transfigured wooden crate in the corner, her knees drawn up to her chest. She was trembling, though she refused to admit it was from anything other than the drop in temperature. Her wand lay uselessly in her lap. She had tried to cast a warming charm 3 times. 3 times the magic had sputtered and died, suffocating under the weight of the dissonance between her and Malfoy. He was standing by the single, grime-encrusted window, staring out into the black abyss of the Peak District night. He hadn't spoken in an hour. The silence was loud. It wasn't empty, it was pressurized. Every time Draco shifted his weight, Hermione felt it. It was a sickening pull in her gut, the magical tether acting like a second nervous system. It was currently a dull ache, a reminder that they were 10 feet apart, the absolute limit of their current tolerance. "Stop thinking so loudly, Granger," Draco said. He didn't turn around. His voice was rough, scraping against the quiet. "I can practically hear your brain grinding its gears, trying to rationalize why we failed." "We failed because you couldn't lower your shields," Hermione snapped, the words tumbling out before she could check them. She regretted them immediately. The air in the hut grew heavier, the pressure in her ears popping. Draco turned slowly. In the dim light of the single candle Hermione had managed to light with a match, a muggle match because their wands were behaving like petulant children. His face was a mask of shadows. "And you were an open book, were you?" he countered, his tone dripping with that familiar defensive venom. He took a step toward her. The ache in Hermione's stomach eased slightly with the proximity, replaced by a spike of adrenaline. "You were terrified. I felt it. You weren't channeling magic. You were channeling panic. I was reacting to your hostility. I was reacting to your judgment." He paced across the small room, the space too small for his restless energy. He looked like a caged animal, sleek, dangerous, and pacing the perimeter of a trap. He stopped in front of the cold hearth, kicking a piece of dry peat with the toe of his boot. "This is pointless," he muttered, running a hand through his damp silver-blonde hair. "We're stuck in a hovel, freezing to death, bound to each other like cursed twins. If the Ministry wanted to execute me, a Dementor's kiss would have been quicker and significantly warmer." Hermione watched him. The candlelight caught the sharp line of his jaw, the hollow of his throat. He looked exhausted. The arrogance was there, yes, but it was thin, stretched over a framework of bone-deep weariness. "We have to sleep," she said quietly. "We can't try the ritual again until dawn. We need to recover." Draco let out a scoff that was half a laugh. "Sleep? Right. On the floor? Or perhaps you've conjured a 4-poster bed while I wasn't looking." "There's a pallet." Hermione pointed to the corner furthest from the draft. was a heap of old sacks and dried heather, likely left by the shepherd months ago. It looked infested. We can transfigure the sacks into blankets, if our magic cooperates for something simple. I am not sleeping on a pile of dirt, Granger. Then stand there and freeze. But I'm lying down. Hermione moved to the pallet. She focused on the burlap sacks, visualizing soft wool. She whispered the incantation. The magic flared, a weak, sputtering spark, and the sacks softened slightly, turning into a rough, scratchy grey flannel. It wasn't Hogwarts standard, but it wasn't burlap. She lay down, curling into a ball, turning her back to him. The room went silent again. The wind howled outside, rattling the loose door in its frame. The temperature was dropping rapidly. It was an unnatural cold, the kind that seeps through skin and muscle to settle in the marrow. The ley lines were bleeding out, and the world was losing its heat. Hermione squeezed her eyes shut. She was shivering, violent, racking shivers that shook her entire frame. She clamped her jaw shut to keep her teeth from chattering, but it was a losing battle. The cold was a physical weight, pressing the air out of her lungs. 10 minutes passed. Then she heard the rustle of fabric, the sound of boots moving across the stone floor. The pull in her gut vanished completely. Draco was standing over her. She could feel his presence, a looming shadow blocking the draft. "You're vibrating the floorboards," he said. His voice was devoid of mockery now. It was flat, clinical. "I'm fine," she stammered, her voice betraying her. "You're hypothermic," he corrected. "And since my survival is currently tethered to your magical core, I cannot allow you to freeze to death. It would be inconvenient for my trial." Hermione didn't have the energy to argue. She felt the pallet depress as he sat down on the edge. "Move over," he commanded. Hermione's eyes flew open. She turned her head. Draco was removing his boots. He had taken off his heavy coat and was spreading it over the transfigured blankets. "What are you doing?" she whispered, scandalized despite the numbness in her toes. "Basic survival, Granger. Body heat. Don't make it weird," he muttered, though he looked like he was swallowing broken glass. "Unless you have a hidden stockpile of pepper-up potion, this is the only way we make it to morning without our cores collapsing from exhaustion." He was right. Logically, he was entirely right. Emotionally, every alarm bell in her head was ringing. Hermione scooted back against the rough stone wall, making space. Draco lay down. He lay on his back, stiff as a board, leaving a pitiful 3 inches of space between them. He pulled the coat and the scratchy blankets up over both of them. The silence that followed was suffocating. Hermione lay rigid, staring at the dark wall. She was acutely aware of him. The sound of his breathing, slow, controlled. The scent of him, rain and that faint, expensive cologne, now mixed with the scent of wood smoke. But the cold was relentless. The gap between them was a canyon of freezing air. Hermione shivered again, a convulsion that curled her spine. "Oh, for Salazar's sake!" Draco hissed. He moved. Suddenly, without warning, he turned onto his side, facing her. His arms snaked out, wrapping around her waist, and he hauled her backward. Hermione gasped, her back colliding with his chest. "Relax," he grumbled near her ear. "I'm not going to bite you." She froze. Being this close to Draco Malfoy was overwhelming. He was warm, shockingly warm. He felt like a furnace against her frozen back. His body was harder than she expected, lean muscle and sharp angles, but the heat radiating from him was a balm to her aching joints. Malfoy. Shut up, Granger. Just shut up. His arm remained around her waist. It wasn't a lover's embrace. It was a clamp, a secure, functional hold to maximize thermal transfer. But his hand was resting flat against her stomach, just above her hip bone. His fingers were long and elegant, and even through the layers of her jumper, she could feel the weight of them. Slowly, agonizingly, the shivering began to subside. The heat seeped into her, thawing the ice in her veins. With the warmth came a strange, terrifying clarity. She was lying in the arms of the boy who had watched her be tortured. The boy she had despised for 7 years. The boy who represented everything she had fought to destroy. And yet, here, in the dark, with the storm tearing at the world outside, he was the only thing anchoring her to the earth. The magical tether, usually a source of pain or nausea, went silent. It hummed, a low, contented purr in the back of her mind. For the first time since the ministry cast the binding spell, there was no resistance, because there was no distance. Hermione felt a traitorous tear slip from her eye, sliding across the bridge of her nose to land on the dusty pillow. She was so tired. She was tired of being strong, tired of being the leader, tired of the cold. Draco shifted slightly. His chin brushed the top of her head. He had to know she was awake. He had to feel the way her heart was hammering against her ribs, a rhythm he could surely feel against his own chest. "You're thinking again," he whispered. His voice was lower now, stripped of the sneer, stripped of the defenses. It sounded broken. "I can't help it," she whispered back. "Try," he said. His thumb moved against her side, a microscopic, perhaps unconscious caress. "Just for tonight. Forget who I am. Forget who you are." "That's lying," she murmured. "The magic requires truth." "The magic is asleep," Draco replied, his breath warm against her neck, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "And the truth is, I'm cold too." It was a small admission, a tiny fragment of vulnerability. Hermione let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Her body, betraying her mind, softened. She leaned back into him, molding her spine to the curve of his chest. She felt him stiffen for a second, surprised by her yielding, and then, slowly, he relaxed too. His grip on her waist shifted, becoming less of a clamp and more of a hold. "Good night, Granger," he murmured into her hair. "Good night, Malfoy," she whispered. They lay there in the dark, two enemies wrapped in a single coat, keeping the world at bay. The storm raged outside, tearing branches from trees and scouring the stone, but inside the circle of their arms, it was quiet. Hermione closed her eyes. The scent of him filled her senses. It wasn't the smell of a monster. It was the smell of a man who was terrified, guilty, and desperate. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to pull away. But as sleep began to drag her under, a darker thought surfaced, sharp and unwanted. This comfort was dangerous. This warmth was a lie born of necessity. Tomorrow the sun would rise, the walls would go back up, and he would hate her again. She felt his heart beating against her back. Thump, thump, thump. It sounded exactly like hers, and that was the most terrifying realization of all. Because if they were the same in the dark, how could she go back to hating him in the light? Draco's breathing evened out. He was asleep, but his hand tightened slightly on her hip, as if, even in his dreams, he was afraid she would disappear. Hermione stared into the darkness, the warmth of his body seeping into her soul, and wondered if they were saving the magic, or if the magic was simply a trap to break them both. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she slept without dreaming of the war. She dreamed only of grey eyes and the sound of rain. The morning light was cruel. It didn't creep into the hut. It pierced it, a grey, watery illumination that exposed the indignity of their survival. Hermione woke first. For a few disoriented seconds, she didn't know where she was. She only knew she was warm and that the world smelled of wood smoke and cedar. Her cheek was pressed against something firm, something that rose and fell with a steady, hypnotic rhythm. Her hand was curled into a fist, resting against fabric that felt like expensive wool. She blinked, her vision clearing. She was staring at a collarbone, a pale, sharp collarbone visible through the unbuttoned top of a shirt. Panic, cold, and sharp flooded her veins. She scrambled backward, her heels scraping against the stone floor. The movement was ungraceful, a frantic retreat from the intimacy that had saved her life. Draco woke instantly. There was no groggy transition. One moment he was asleep, the next he was sitting up, his wand in his hand, his eyes scanning the room for a threat. When his gaze landed on her, huddled against the wall, hair wild, face flushed, his shoulders dropped, but the tension in his jaw remained. He looked at the empty space beside him on the pallet, then at her. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The memory of the night, her back against his chest, his hand on her hip, hung between them like a physical object, heavy and undeniable. "We need to move," Draco said, his voice rough with sleep. He stood up, turning his back to her to button his coat. His movements were stiff, mechanical. He was rebuilding the fortress, brick by brick. "The second cairn is in the valley," Hermione said, her voice sounding thin to her own ears. She busied herself with her bag, refusing to look at him. "If we leave now, we can reach it by noon." "Good. The sooner we finish, the sooner I can scrub this." He gestured vaguely at the hut, at the air, at her. "Experience from my memory." It was a weak insult, lacking his usual venom. It sounded less like an attack and more like a plea. The journey to the valley was silent, but it wasn't the hostile silence of the day before. The tether between them was dormant. It no longer yanked or burned. It simply existed, a slack line connecting their cause. Hermione walked behind him, watching the way he moved. Draco Malfoy had always walked with an arrogant stride, as if he owned the ground beneath his feet. Now he walked with caution, like a man navigating a minefield. The war had taken his swagger and replaced it with vigilance. They reached the second cairn just as the sun broke through the cloud cover, casting pale shafts of light onto the wet grass. This location was different. It wasn't a summit. It was a hollow, a natural amphitheater of dark volcanic rock tucked into the side of a cliff. In the center stood a monolith of obsidian, smooth and reflective as a black mirror. The air here didn't hum. It whispered. It was a soft, sibilant sound, like 1,000 voices speaking at once. Hermione approached the obsidian stone. As she stepped closer, her reflection appeared in the black surface. But it wasn't just a reflection. The image wavered, showing not just her face, but flashes of something else. She saw herself screaming in the Department of Mysteries. She saw herself erasing her parents' memories. She saw herself sitting alone in her flat, staring at a blank wall. She gasped and stepped back. "What is it?" Draco asked, coming up beside her. He looked into the stone and flinched, his pale skin turning ghostly white. "It's a mirror of truth," Hermione whispered, the realization settling in her stomach like lead. The first cairn required resonance. This one requires revelation. We can't just channel magic. We have to offer it something. "Offer it what?" Draco asked, though he clearly already knew the answer. He was staring at his own reflection with a look of profound loathing. "A truth," Hermione said. "A truth we haven't admitted to ourselves." "Absolutely not," Draco snapped, turning away. "I am not playing parlor games with ancient magic, Granger. I am here to perform a ritual, not therapy." "It won't work otherwise," Hermione cried, frustration bubbling up. "Look at the runes at the base. Blood speaks, but truth binds. If we try to force it like yesterday, it will reject us again, and I don't think we'll survive another rejection." Draco paced the small clearing, his hands clenched in his hair. He looked trapped. "You go first, then," he spat, turning on her. "You're the Gryffindor. Be brave. Bleed for the rock." Hermione looked at the stone. She looked at Draco. His grey eyes were defiant, but behind the defiance she saw fear. He was terrified of being seen. She took a deep breath. She had to do this. For the magic. For the world. But mostly she realized with a start because she wanted him to know. She was tired of being the pedestal he put her on, the untouchable, perfect enemy. She stepped up to the obsidian. She placed her palm against the cold surface. Her voice shook. She closed her eyes. "Everyone thinks I'm fixing the world because I'm noble. Because I'm good." The stone began to vibrate. A low purple light pulsed from within the black depths. "But I'm not," she whispered, the words tearing out of her throat. "I'm doing it because without the war, I don't know who I am. I'm terrified that I'm nothing without a fight to win. I'm terrified that I'm broken and that peace is just a waiting room for me to realize how empty I am." The silence that followed was absolute. The purple light in the stone flared, bright and accepting. The magic accepted the offering. It swirled around Hermione's hand, warm and validating. She opened her eyes, tears streaming down her face. She didn't wipe them away. She turned to Draco. He was staring at her. His expression was unreadable, his mouth slightly open. The sneer was gone. In its place was something like shock. He had spent years believing she was a monolith of self-righteousness. Seeing her crack, seeing her admit to the same hollowness he felt, it seemed to paralyze him. "Your turn," she said softly. Draco shook his head. "I can't. You have to, or we fail. Granger, you don't want to hear what I have to say. The stone wants to hear it. It doesn't judge, Draco. It just takes." He flinched at the use of his given name. It was the first time she had said it without malice. He walked toward the stone like a man walking to the gallows. He didn't look at her. He stared into the black surface, into his own eyes. His hand trembled as he raised it, hovering inches from the obsidian. "I didn't identify you," he said. His voice was so quiet, the wind almost stole it. Hermione froze. The air in the clearing grew heavy. "At the manor," Draco continued, his voice gaining a jagged edge. "When the Snatchers brought you in, I knew it was you. Instantly. I knew your hair, your voice, your everything." He pressed his hand against the stone. The magic flared red, violent and angry, before settling into a deep, blood-colored pulse. I told myself I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure, but that's a lie. He turned his head, looking directly at Hermione now. His eyes were wet, swimming with a toxicity of guilt she couldn't comprehend. I didn't say anything because I was a coward, but also because I wanted you to live, and I knew that if I gave you to the Dark Lord, part of me would die with you. The confession hung in the air, raw and bleeding. Hermione stopped breathing. She remembered that day, the swelling of her face, the fear, his grey eyes refusing to meet hers. She had always thought he was just protecting himself. She hadn't known. She hadn't known he was trying, in his own twisted, paralyzed way, to save her. "I watched her torture you," Draco whispered, the words cracking. "And I did nothing. That is my truth. I am a monster who stood by and watched." The stone roared. The red and purple lights within the obsidian collided, merging into a blinding liquid gold. The magic didn't wait for them to channel it. It reached out. Tendrils of golden light erupted from the stone, wrapping around Draco's wrist, then Hermione's. It pulled them together. "Malfoy!" Hermione gasped as the force yanked her forward. She collided with him, but this time he didn't push her away. The magic was surging through them, a circuit completed by their honesty. It wasn't the cold, draining vacuum of the first can. This was fire. It was euphoria. Draco's hands came up, gripping her upper arms to steady her. His touch was electric. The magic flowed from his skin into hers, a loop of power that felt like champagne in her blood. It was intoxicating. The guilt, the fear, the cold. It was all washed away by the sheer, overwhelming power of the ley line reigniting. It's too much," Draco gasped, his head falling back, his eyes fluttering shut. "Don't fight it," Hermione said, her voice breathless. She felt lightheaded, drunk on the sensation. She could feel his magical core fluttering against hers. Not sharp anymore, but velvety, dark, and desperate. They were standing chest to chest, the golden light swirling around them like a tornado. The boundaries between them were blurring. She could feel his relief. She could feel his sorrow. And underneath it all, she could feel a hunger that mirrored her own. Draco looked down at her. His pupils were blown wide, swallowing the grey. The magic was a high, stripping away his restraint. "You're not empty," he murmured, his voice low and vibrating in her chest. His hands slid up her arms to cup her face. His thumbs traced her cheekbones, wiping away the tear tracks. "You are the most substantial thing I have ever known." Hermione's heart hammered against his ribs. The air was thick with ozone and the scent of rain and him. "And you're not a monster," she whispered back, her hands finding purchase on the lapels of his coat. "You were just a boy." The acceptance hit him harder than the magic. His breath hitched. He looked at her mouth. The desire was sudden, violent, and mutual. The magic was pushing them, urging them to merge completely, to seal the bond in the most ancient way possible. Draco leaned in. His forehead rested against hers. They were breathing the same air. The golden light reached a crescendo, a silent explosion that sent a shockwave through the valley, healing the earth for miles around. But in the center of the storm, they didn't move. Hermione waited. Every nerve in her body was screaming for him to close the distance. She wanted to taste the forgiveness. She wanted to know if he tasted like the storm, but he didn't kiss her. Instead, he let out a shuddering breath and pulled back, just an inch. He looked at her with an intensity that burned. "We did it," he whispered, his voice hoarse. The golden light faded slowly, leaving them standing in the grey morning, still clinging to each other. The magic settled, leaving a residual hum in their blood, a buzzing energy that made their skin sensitive to the slightest touch. Draco slowly lowered his hands from her face, but his fingers lingered for a second on her jawline, as if he couldn't quite bring himself to let go. "We did it," Hermione repeated, her voice trembling. She stepped back, the loss of contact feeling like a physical blow. She looked at him, really looked at him. The enemy, the Death Eater, the boy who had just confessed he would have died inside if she had died. The dynamic had shifted. The ice hadn't just cracked, it had melted, and in its place was a deep, terrifying current that threatened to sweep them both away. Draco turned toward the horizon, his profile sharp against the sky. He was composing himself, locking the emotions back up, but Hermione saw the tremor in his hands. "The third cairn," he said, his voice struggling for normalcy, "is north. We should go." "Yes," Hermione said. But as they walked out of the valley, the silence was different again. It wasn't empty. It was filled with the echo of their truths. And for the first time, Hermione didn't walk behind him. She walked beside him. The euphoria of the ritual did not last. It curdled. What had felt like liquid gold in their veins the previous day had turned into a thick, acidic sludge by morning. The magical high, that intoxicating blend of shared souls and raw power, had evaporated, leaving behind a hangover that was spiritual as much as it was physical. They were moving north, crossing the border into the Scottish Highlands. The landscape had shifted from the rolling green of the peaks to something more jagged and unforgiving. Dark slate mountains pierced the low-hanging belly of the sky, and the heather was brown and brittle, snapping under their boots like small bones. Hermione walked 3 paces behind Draco. She was watching his back. Yesterday, that back had been a shield. Yesterday, his hands had cupped her face, and his eyes had looked at her with a devastating, naked honesty. "You are the most substantial thing I have ever known." The words echoed in her mind, looping relentlessly, a ghost of a memory that felt increasingly like a hallucination. Because the Draco Malfoy walking in front of her now was not the man who had touched her cheek. He had rebuilt the glass fortress. It had started the moment they woke up. He had packed his bag with aggressive, jerky movements, refusing to meet her eyes. When she had tried to speak, to acknowledge the seismic shift between them, he had cut her off with a look so cold it could have frozen the marrow in her bones. "Keep up, Granger," he threw over his shoulder now, his voice sharp and brittle. "At this pace, we'll be sleeping in a bog." "I'm keeping up," Hermione retorted, though she was breathless. The air was thinner here, or perhaps the tension was just sucking the oxygen out of the atmosphere. "Why are you walking so fast? The resonance readings aren't going anywhere." Draco stopped abruptly. He didn't turn around immediately. He stood rigid, looking out over a deep, mist-filled gorge that cut across their path. "Because I want this over," he said, his voice low. "I want to be done with this wretched tether. I want to be done with you." The words landed like a physical slap. Hermione felt the sting of them in her chest. She stepped closer, the magical bond humming with a discordant, grating noise, like a cello bow dragged across a rusty saw. "You didn't want to be done with me yesterday," she said quietly, risking the confrontation. "Yesterday, you said—" Draco spun around. The movement was so fast, so predatory that Hermione flinched. His face was pale, drawn tight with exhaustion, and something that looked suspiciously like panic. But his eyes were hard. The grey was flat, like slate under a winter sky. The occlumency walls were up, high and impenetrable, locking away the boy who had confessed his guilt. "Yesterday," he hissed, stepping into her space not to comfort, but to intimidate, was a side effect. It was a magical overdose. You of all people should know better than to mistake a rush of dopamine and adrenaline for sentiment. Hermione held her ground, though her hands were shaking. "It wasn't just adrenaline, Malfoy. You told me the truth. You let me see you." "I let you see what the stone forced me to show," he spat. "It was coercion, Granger. Emotional rape by a rock. Don't think for a second that I wanted to share my soul with you. Don't think that moment meant we are friends, or allies, or anything other than two prisoners serving a sentence." He was lying. Hermione could feel it. The tether between them was twitching, reacting to the dishonesty. A dull, throbbing headache began to pulse behind her eyes, the penalty for his denial. "You're lying," she whispered, "and it's hurting us. Can't you feel the resistance? The magic is fighting you." "The magic can rot," Draco sneered. He turned back to the gorge. "We need to cross. There's no bridge. We'll have to apparate across the gap. The anti-apparition wards shouldn't extend this high up." "It's too dangerous," Hermione warned, looking at the swirling mist below. The drop was hundreds of feet. "Our cores are out of sync. If we try to apparate together while you're like this, we could splinch, or worse." "I am perfectly in control, Granger. Unlike you, I don't let my emotions dictate my competence." He held out his arm. It was a demand, not an offer. "Grab on." Hermione hesitated. The headache spiked, a sharp needle of pain. Everything in her instinct screamed no. The bond was screaming no. "Draco, please, let's just walk around. It will take an hour, but—" "I am not walking for an hour in this freezing damp because you're cowardly," he shouted. The veneer of control cracked, revealing a flash of erratic, terrifying anger. "Take my arm." She didn't move fast enough. Draco reached out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was hard, lacking all the gentleness of the previous day. He yanked her toward him, and before she could protest, he turned on his heel. Crack. The sensation was wrong instantly. Usually, apparition felt like being squeezed through a rubber tube. This felt like being put through a meat grinder. The world twisted violently. The discordant magic between them, her fear and his denial, clashed in the void. There was a tearing sound, louder than thunder. Hermione screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the vacuum. They materialized on the other side of the gorge, but not on the ground. They appeared 10 feet in the air, the magic rejecting their landing. They fell. Hermione hit the wet, rocky ground hard, rolling to absorb the impact. Mud and gravel scraped her face. She gasped, the wind knocked out of her, lying sprawled in the heather. "Damn it!" She heard Draco's voice, tight with pain. She scrambled up, her wand instantly in her hand, panic overriding the ache in her ribs. Draco was on his knees a few yards away. He was clutching his left shoulder. Blood was seeping through his fingers, staining the black wool of his coat a darker, slicker shade. "You're hurt," Hermione gasped, rushing toward him. Stay back, he snarled, scrambling backward, his boots sliding in the mud. He looked at her with wild, dilated eyes. Don't touch me. Hermione froze. Malfoy, you're bleeding. The apparition. We must have splinched slightly. Let me see. I said stay back. He pointed his wand at her. His hand was shaking violently. The sight of his wand pointed at her chest stopped her cold. It wasn't a playful gesture. It was defensive. He looked at her as if she were the danger, as if she were the one who had hurt him. Why are doing this? Hermione's voice broke. The rain began to fall again, cold and sleety, mingling with the mist. Why are you pushing me away? We were fine. We were not fine, Draco yelled, lowering his wand, but refusing to let her close. He winced, clutching his shoulder tighter. We were drowning, Granger. You think because we shared a cry and a magic trick that the past is erased? You think I can just forget? Forget what? What I am. He struggled to his feet, swaying slightly. The blood was dripping onto the grass now. I am a Death Eater. I am the man who let them into the school. I am the reason Dumbledore is dead. I am the reason you were tortured. I know that, Hermione shouted back, the tears mixing with the rain on her face. I know all of that, and I forgave you. Well, I haven't. The scream tore out of him, raw and guttural. It echoed off the canyon walls, silencing the wind. Draco stood there, chest heaving, his face twisted in agony that had nothing to do with his bleeding shoulder. I haven't forgave myself, he whispered, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a crushing despair. And seeing you look at me with that hope, it makes me sick, because I know I don't deserve it, and I know, eventually, you'll realize it too. You'll wake up one morning and remember who I am, and you'll look at me with disgust, and He choked on the words. He looked away, staring at the grey horizon. I can't survive that, Granger. I can't survive you looking at me with love, only to have it turn to hate. It's better if you hate me now. It's safer. Hermione stood motionless. The rain soaked through her clothes, chilling her skin, but the cold inside was worse. He wasn't pushing her away because he didn't care. He was pushing her away because he cared too much, and the weight of it was crushing him. He was preemptively breaking his own heart and hers to avoid a theoretical future pain. So, that's it? Hermione asked, her voice hollow. You just decide for me? You decide that I'm going to hate you, so you treat me like trash to speed up the process? Draco didn't answer. He turned, gripping his injured shoulder. He cast a clumsy healing charm on himself. The bleeding slowed, but the wound didn't close properly. The magic was too unstable. We need to find shelter, he said, his voice flat and dead again. The mask was back in place, but it was cracked, held together by sheer will. The storm is getting worse. He started walking. He didn't wait for her. Hermione watched him go. The tether tugged at her, a dull, aching line hooked into her navel. It felt heavy now. It felt like a chain. She followed him because she had to. But the distance between them was no longer just 10 feet of wet heather. It was miles of history, guilt and fear. They walked in silence for hours. The landscape grew bleaker, stripped of color. The sky was a bruising purple-black as evening approached. They found a small cave, a shallow recess in the rock face, barely deep enough to keep the rain off. Draco sat on one side, Hermione on the other. They didn't speak. They didn't try to make a fire. The wood here was too wet, and their magic was too dampened by the emotional chasm to sustain a flame. It was colder than the previous night. The damp seeped into the stone, into their clothes. Hermione wrapped her arms around herself, staring out at the falling rain. She waited. She waited for him to look at her. She waited for him to offer his coat, or a sarcastic comment, or anything. But Draco sat with his head back against the stone, his eyes closed. He was breathing shallowly. He looked pale, almost translucent in the failing light. The blood loss, combined with the magical exhaustion, was taking its toll. He was shivering. Minute, suppressed tremors that ran through his frame. He wouldn't ask for help. She knew that. He would rather freeze to death in this cave than reach out to her again. He had terrified himself with his own capacity for softness, and now he was punishing himself with the cold. Hermione felt a surge of anger, not at him, but for him. He was such an idiot, such a broken, tragic, stubborn idiot. She looked at the space between them, the invisible line where the magic should be resonating. It was silent, dead air. "Malfoy," she said into the darkness. He didn't open his eyes. "Go to sleep, Granger. You're cold." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're stubborn. Leave it alone." Hermione bit her lip. She wanted to scream. She wanted to shake him, but she stayed where she was. "I don't hate you," she said, her voice steady. "And I'm not going to hate you. You can try to make me. You can be as cruel as you want, but you can't control how I feel. That's the one thing you can't control." Draco's jaw tightened. A muscle jumped in his cheek. He opened his eyes and looked at her. In the gloom, his eyes were like ghosts. "Then you are a fool," he whispered. He turned his head away, breaking the contact. Hermione pulled her knees to her chest. She watched the rain blur the world outside. She felt lonely, a profound, aching loneliness that was worse than being alone. Because he was right there. He was right there, and he was choosing to be 1,000,000 miles away. The seesaw had tipped. They had touched the sun, and now they had crashed back into the mud. As the night deepened, the silence in the cave became a solid thing. Hermione shivered, the cold finally reaching her core. Across the small space, she heard Draco's breathing hitch, a sound of suppressed pain. She didn't move to him. She couldn't. Not tonight. Tonight, the phantom pain of what they almost had was the only thing keeping them warm. The silence of the next day was different. It wasn't the heavy, stony silence of the cave. It was the silence of a held breath. They moved through a dense pine forest in the Scottish lowlands. The trees here were ancient, their trunks thick and knobbly, blocking out the grey sky. The ground was a carpet of wet needles that swallowed the sound of their footsteps. Draco walked with a limp. He hadn't let Hermione check his shoulder, but she could see the stiffness in his left side, the way he favoured his right leg to keep his balance. He looked like a spectre, pale, hollow-eyed, moving on sheer spite. Hermione followed, her gaze glued to the back of his black coat. The tether was calm, but it felt thin, fragile, like a thread of spider silk that could snap with a sudden movement. "We need to stop," Hermione said, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the hush of the trees. "Draco, you're bleeding again. I can smell it." "Keep walking," he rasped, not turning around. "The forest. It doesn't feel right." He was right. The air here was stagnant. There was no birdsong, no rustle of small animals, just a pressing, suffocating stillness. The magical instability of the world was manifesting here as a void. "Draco!" A twig snapped. It wasn't a natural sound. It was the crack of something heavy stepping on bone. Draco spun around, his wand instantly in his hand. Hermione drew hers a split second later. "Back to back," Draco ordered, his voice suddenly crisp, the exhaustion vanishing under the adrenaline of combat. They pressed together. Hermione felt the heat of his back against hers. The contact sent a jolt through the tether, a sudden, violent spike of awareness. "What is it?" she whispered. "Shadows," Draco hissed. "Remnants of the war. They feed on discord." From the darkness between the trees they emerged. They weren't dementors, and they weren't lethifolds. They were shapeless masses of oily black smoke, moving with a jerky, unnatural speed. They were the physical manifestation of the broken ley lines, chaos given form. A mass of shadow lunged from the left. "Stupefy!" Hermione shouted. Her spell hit the mass and fizzled. A shower of red sparks died harmlessly against the smoke. "Magic requires intent," Draco yelled, slashing his wand at another shadow. "And we are a mess, Granger. Use fire! Incendio!" A jet of flame erupted from his wand, but it was weak, sputtering out before it reached the target. The shadow recoiled but didn't dissipate. It swirled, reforming, and lunged for Draco's injured side. "Protego!" Hermione screamed, throwing herself in front of him. She didn't have time to cast the shield properly. She threw her body into the path of the entity to save him. The shadow slammed into her chest. It didn't cut like a knife. It burned like dry ice. A freezing, necrotic pain exploded across her left shoulder and arm. The force of the blow threw her backward. She hit the trunk of a pine tree with a sickening crunch and slid to the ground. "Hermione!" The name tore out of Draco's throat. It wasn't Granger. It was her name, screamed with a panic that shattered the forest's quiet. He didn't cast another spell. He didn't think. He simply let go. A shockwave of pure, accidental magic exploded from his core. It was silver and wild, fueled by terror. It rippled outward in a concentric ring, blasting the trees and vaporizing the shadows instantly. The black smoke shrieked and dissolved into nothingness. Silence rushed back in, louder than before. Draco dropped his wand. He fell to his knees beside her, his hands hovering over her body, shaking violently. "Granger! Hermione!" She was conscious, but barely. The pain in her left arm was blinding. She looked up at him. His face was a blur of white skin and grey eyes, terrified and open. "I'm okay," she wheezed, though the edges of her vision were greying. "You are not okay," he snarled, his voice trembling. "You stupid, self-righteous Gryffindor. Why did you do that?" He reached for her arm. The sleeve of her denim jacket was shredded. The fabric was soaked in blood, but it wasn't just red. The wound left by the shadow was oozing a black, tar-like substance. "It's necrotic," Draco whispered, horror dawning on his face. "It's rotting the flesh. I have to stop it." "Wands won't work," Hermione gasped, her teeth chattering as the magical cold spread through her veins. "Not precise enough." "I know." Draco's hands were frantic now. He pulled a small silver flask of dittany from his pocket, but he hesitated. "I need to clean it first. I need to see the damage." He gripped the torn fabric of her jacket and shirt. "I'm going to rip it. Forgive me." He pulled. The fabric gave way with a sharp tear, exposing her left forearm and shoulder to the damp forest air. Draco froze. The wound from the shadow was ugly, a jagged, blackened gash running from her shoulder down to her elbow. But that wasn't what stopped him. The gash crossed directly over the scar. Mud blood. The letters, carved by Bellatrix's knife years ago, were usually faint silver lines. Now they were inflamed, framed by the fresh, ugly injury. The shadow's rot seemed to be drawn to the old dark magic of the scar, pulsing around the letters as if trying to reopen them. Hermione saw his gaze fixate on the word. She tried to pull her arm back, shame flushing her cheeks even through the pain. "Draco, don't..." He didn't let go. His grip on her wrist tightened, not to hurt, but to anchor. He stared at the word carved into her skin. His breath hitched, a jagged sound like a sob trapped in his throat. This was the physical proof of his family's legacy. This was the sins of the past, etched permanently onto the person he was currently trying to save. "I can't," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I can't touch it. I'll contaminate it." "You have to," Hermione whispered. The cold was reaching her heart. "Please." Draco looked at her face. He saw the trust there. Blind, stupid, beautiful trust. He set his jaw. He uncorked a bottle of water and a vial of antiseptic essence from his kit. He didn't use magic. He used his hands. He poured the water over the wound to wash away the black ooze. Hermione hissed in pain, arching her back off the pine needles. I know, Draco murmured, a frantic litany. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket and began to wipe the wound. His touch was agonizingly gentle. The boy who had sneered at her for 7 years was now cleaning her blood with hands that trembled with reverence. He traced the path of the gash, inevitably brushing his fingers over the letters. U-D. His fingers lingered on the scar tissue. He wasn't cleaning it anymore. He was touching it, acknowledging it. "She did this in my drawing room," he whispered. He wasn't talking to her. He was talking to the universe. "I heard you screaming, and I stood there." "You're here now," Hermione said softly. The pain was receding, replaced by the warmth of his skin against hers. Draco looked up. His eyes were swimming with tears he refused to shed. "I am here now," he repeated, "and I am going to fix this." He applied the dittany. The steam rose, hissing, and the skin began to knit together. The black rot vanished, leaving behind angry red skin, but the danger was gone. He didn't pull away when the healing was done. He kept her hand in his. He sat back on his heels, breathing hard as if he had run a marathon. The forest around them had darkened as evening fell, and the clouds above finally broke, revealing a swathe of brilliant, icy stars. "You saved me," Draco said. It was an accusation. "You jumped in front of it." "You would have done the same," Hermione replied. "I don't know if I would have," he admitted, his voice raw. "I'd like to think so, but my instinct is survival. Yours is sacrifice." "Draco, stop." He looked at her arm again, his thumb brushing over the fading scar of the word mudblood. "Does it hurt? The old scar?" "Sometimes," Hermione admitted. "When it rains, or when I remember." Draco lifted her hand. He did it slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. He brought her wrist to his lips. Hermione's breath caught in her throat. The world stopped. The forest, the cold, the mission. It all vanished. He didn't kiss the skin. He hovered just above it, his breath warm against the letters. It was a gesture of such profound contrition, such intimate worship, that it felt more scandalous than any kiss. "I am sorry," he breathed against her skin. "For every word, for every silence, for everything." He turned his head slightly and pressed his lips to the pulse point of her wrist, just below the scar. The sensation was electric. A jolt of pure heat shot up Hermione's arm and settled low in her stomach. The magical tether, which had been a thin thread, suddenly roared to life. It didn't burn. It sang. It wrapped around them, a cocoon of golden warmth in the freezing night. Draco lowered her hand but didn't release it. He looked at her. The distance was gone. The fortress was gone. There was only Draco, a man with blood on his shirt and moonlight in his hair, looking at her as if she were the only source of light in the universe. "Hermione," he whispered. It was the second time he had used her name. It sounded like a prayer. He leaned in. Hermione's heart hammered against her ribs. She leaned in too. Her eyes fluttered shut. She could feel his breath on her lips, smelling of mint and fear. She tilted her chin up, surrendering. His hand came up to cup her neck, his fingers tangling in her wild, frizzy curls. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. They were inches apart, a fraction of a second from the shift that would change everything. Draco hesitated. Hermione opened her eyes. He was looking at her mouth with a hunger that was terrifying, but his eyes were filled with a sudden, sharp doubt. "If I kiss you," he whispered, his voice rough, "I won't be able to let you go. When this is over, I won't be able to walk away." "Then don't walk away," Hermione whispered. Draco searched her face, looking for the lie, looking for the pity. He found neither. He closed his eyes and leaned his forehead against hers. He didn't kiss her, not yet. He just breathed her in, holding her as if she were made of glass. "I can't ruin you," he murmured into the space between them. "Not tonight. Tonight, you're hurt, and I'm a mess." He pulled back just slightly. The loss of contact was a physical ache. "We should rest," he said, his voice straining for normalcy but failing. "The magic is stable. The tether is calm." He helped her sit up. He took off his coat, again, and wrapped it around her shoulders. He transfigured a bed of pine needles into something softer. They lay down together under the starlight. This time, there was no hesitation. Draco pulled her against him, her back to his chest, his arm wrapping securely around her waist, his hand covering hers. Hermione lay awake, watching the stars through the canopy of trees. Her arm throbbed with a dull pain, but her heart was racing. He hadn't kissed her, but he had done something far more dangerous. He had let her see that he loved her. And as she listened to his breathing, even out into sleep, Hermione Granger realized with a terrified clarity that the feeling was entirely, devastatingly mutual. The enemies to lovers trope had played its hand. The enemy was gone. But as she drifted off, a cold thought pricked at the back of her mind. The mission wasn't over. They still had one cairn left. And the closer they got to the end, the closer they got to the reality of the world waiting for them. A world where he was a convicted Death Eater and she was a hero, and those two lines were never meant to cross. Draco tightened his hold on her in his sleep, and Hermione closed her eyes, praying that the morning wouldn't break the spell. The Scottish Highlands were a landscape of bruised purples and violently green moss, a place where the earth seemed to be swallowing the sky. They had been walking for 2 days since the forest, and for 2 days the world had been deceptively, dangerously perfect. They moved as one entity. There was no need for verbal commands. A tilt of Draco's head told Hermione to step left. A slight tension in Hermione's shoulders told Draco to pause. The magical tether, once a rusty chain dragging them through the mud, had transformed into a hum of golden intuition. It was a constant, low-frequency warmth in the center of Hermione's chest, purring with satisfaction every time their arms brushed, and their arms brushed often. They reached the ruins of the final destination, the spire of Ethelgard, just as the sun began its descent behind a wall of slate-grey clouds. The spire was a skeletal finger of stone, pointing accusingly at the heavens, perched on a cliff edge overlooking a churning black loch. "We may camp in the Undercroft," Draco said, his voice carrying effortlessly over the wind. He turned to her, and the ghost of a smile touched his lips. It wasn't a smirk. It was small, tired, and real. "Unless you prefer sleeping on the cliff edge to test your luck again." "The Undercroft is fine," Hermione replied, fighting the urge to reach out and smooth the wind-blown hair from his forehead. The intimacy of the last 48 hours terrified her as much as it intoxicated her. They set up camp in what used to be the castle cellar. It was dry, protected from the gale, and smelled of ancient earth. They worked in tandem. Hermione cast the waterproofing charms. Draco arranged the stones for a fire. There was a domesticity to it that felt illicit. "I'm going to scout the perimeter," Draco said, dusting his hands on his coat. "The readings for the final ritual are volatile. I want to make sure we're alone." He paused as he passed her. His hand grazed her shoulder, a fleeting, deliberate touch that sent a shiver down her spine. "Don't go anywhere, Granger." "I'm not leaving, Malfoy," she said softly. He held her gaze for a second too long, his grey eyes open and unguarded, before turning and disappearing up the crumbling stairs. Hermione let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for days. She sat on her transfigured bedroll, feeling the warmth of the fire he had built. She felt safe. For the first time since the war ended, she felt completely, irrationally safe. She reached for her beaded bag to retrieve a book, but her hand bumped against Draco's leather satchel. It was sitting open, spilling its contents slightly onto the stone floor. She went to nudge it upright, but something caught her eye. It wasn't dark magic. It wasn't a weapon. It was a letter. It was thick, creamy parchment with the official wax seal of the Ministry of Magic, specifically the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. It was tucked halfway inside a book on magical theory, as if hastily shoved out of sight. Hermione knew she shouldn't touch it. The new, fragile trust between them was built on respect. But the seal, it was the seal of the office that was currently deciding Draco's fate. Curiosity, that old fatal flaw, won out. She pulled the parchment free. Her hands trembled slightly. "Mr. Malfoy, regarding your inquiry of the 14th..." Hermione's eyes scanned the text, her heart beginning to hammer a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "The Wizengamot has agreed to the terms. Upon the successful activation of the Cairn of Unity, and provided Miss Granger certifies your full cooperation, the sequestration of the Malfoy vaults will be lifted immediately. Furthermore, your sentence will be commuted to time served, plus a fine of 50,000 galleons. Please ensure the mission is completed by the solstice. As discussed, Your primary objective is to ensure Ms. Granger's emotional stability to facilitate the resonance. Use whatever means necessary to ensure her compliance. Signed, Tiberius Ogden, head of DMLE. The world stopped. The golden hum in her chest didn't just fade, it snapped. Hermione read the last line again. Use whatever means necessary to ensure her compliance. The air in the undercroft seemed to vanish. She felt a physical blow to her stomach, nauseating and sharp. The kindness, the vulnerability in the forest, the way he had cleaned her wound, the way he had looked at her like she was the sun. Compliance. It was a job. It was a transaction. He was playing a role to get his money back, to get his freedom. He knew the magic required resonance, so he had manufactured it. He had manufactured her. She stood up, the letter crumbling in her fist. The fire Draco had built suddenly looked mocking, a trap to keep her warm and pliable. Footsteps echoed on the stairs. Draco descended, shaking rain from his hair. He looked windblown and strangely alive. "Perimeter is clear," he announced, walking toward the fire. "The magical density is incredible, Granger. I think tomorrow we can—" He stopped. He saw her face. Hermione stood by the fire, her posture rigid, her eyes wide and dark. She looked like a statue carved from ice. Draco's gaze dropped to her hand, to the crumpled parchment with the ministry seal. The color drained from his face so fast it was as if he had been struck. The light in his eyes, that tentative, beautiful light, was extinguished instantly. "Hermione," he started, taking a step forward. "Don't," she whispered. The word was a blade. "You went through my things," he said. His voice wasn't angry. It was flat, resigned. "I knocked it over," she lied, her voice shaking. She held up the letter. "Is this it? Is this what I am to you? A condition for your parole? A key to your vault?" "It's not what you think," Draco said, but he didn't move closer. He stood on the other side of the fire, the flames dancing between them like a barrier. "It says, ensure her compliance," Hermione shouted, the tears stinging her eyes. "Is that what the forest was? Is that what the kiss almost was? A strategy? Use whatever means necessary?" "No," Draco snapped, a flash of anger cutting through his shock. "The ministry sent that letter, not me. Those are their words, not mine." "But you hid it!" Hermione threw the parchment at him. It fluttered harmlessly to the floor between them. "You didn't tell me that your freedom was contingent on managing me. You let me believe we were in this together, that we were connecting because... She couldn't finish the sentence. "Because you loved me." Draco looked at the letter on the floor. His jaw worked, grinding his teeth. "I hid it because I was ashamed," he said, his voice low and grating. "I hid it because I didn't want you to think exactly what you are thinking right now." "And what am I thinking, Malfoy?" "That I am incapable of doing anything decent without a reward," he said. He looked up, and his eyes were cold again. The occlumency walls were slamming down, brick by brick, faster than ever before. "You think I'm manipulating you. You think I'm faking it for the gold." "Tell me you don't care about the vaults," Hermione challenged. "Tell me you don't care about the sentence." "Of course I care about the sentence," he yelled, throwing his hands up. "I don't want to go to Azkaban, Granger. Is that a crime? Does wanting to be free make me a liar?" "No," Hermione whispered, "but using me to get it does." "I am not using you." "Then why does it feel like it?" She wrapped her arms around herself, the phantom warmth of the last 2 days turning into a freezing ache. Why did you wait until the magic required honesty to be kind to me? Why did you wait until the letter arrived to touch me?" Draco stared at her. He looked at the tears streaming down her face, and he saw the doubt, the absolute, unshakable suspicion. He realized then that it didn't matter what he said. It didn't matter that he had burned the first draft of his reply to Ogden, telling him to go to hell. It didn't matter that in the forest he had forgotten about the vaults entirely. All she saw was a Malfoy, a Death Eater, a liar, and the tragedy was he couldn't blame her. A dark, bitter laugh escaped his lips. It was a terrifying sound. "You're right," he said. The words were poison, designed to kill the hope before it could hurt him any further. Hermione flinched. "What?" "You're right," Draco repeated, his face twisting into a sneer that looked like a mask of pain. "I am a Malfoy. We are practical people. I did what I had to do to ensure the mission succeeded. The magic needed emotion, so I gave it emotion. The magic needed intimacy, so I gave it intimacy." He was lying. He was lying to protect himself, to burn the bridge before she could push him off it. If she was going to think he was a monster, he would be the monster. It was easier than being a man who was rejected. Hermione felt the blood drain from her face. You faked it? The mirror? The forest?" Draco looked her dead in the eye. His heart was shattering in his chest, sharp shard by sharp shard, but his voice was steady. "I am a very good Occlumens, Granger." The silence that followed was louder than the storm outside. Hermione took a step back. She looked at him as if he had struck her. The betrayal wasn't just in the words, it was in the memory of her own vulnerability. She had opened herself up, peeled back her armor, and he had used it as a stepping stone. "I hate you," she whispered. It wasn't a scream, it was a statement of fact. "Good," Draco said, turning his back to her. "Hatred is a strong emotion. It should work perfectly for the final ritual. Passion is passion, after all." He walked to the far corner of the Undercroft, into the shadows. Hermione stood by the fire, shivering uncontrollably. The air in the room changed. The golden hum was gone, replaced by a static charge that smelled of ozone and rot. The magic of the spire was reacting to them. The flames of the fire turned a sickly green and dwindled, unable to find purchase in the suffocating atmosphere of distrust. Hermione sank to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. She stared at the crumpled letter. She wanted to believe he was lying now. She wanted to believe that the man in the forest was real, and this cold, cruel creature was the mask. But the doubt was a parasite. It whispered that she was a fool. It whispered that a Malfoy could never love a mudblood without an agenda. It whispered that she had been played, and the pain of it was a physical agony that eclipsed any curse she had ever taken. Across the room, in the dark, Draco leaned his head against the cold stone wall. He squeezed his eyes shut, his hand clutching his chest where the bond used to sing. He had won. He had convinced her. He was safe inside his fortress of glass. But as the temperature in the room dropped and the shadows lengthened, Draco Malfoy realized that the fortress wasn't a shelter. It was a tomb, and he had just walled himself in, alone. Outside, the wind howled around the spire, sounding like a woman screaming. The final seesaw had tipped. They'd gone from the warmth of the sun to the absolute zero of space. And tomorrow, they had to perform a ritual that demanded a sacrifice. Hermione stared into the dying green fire, her heart hardening into a diamond-sharp weapon. If he wanted compliance, she would give him compliance, but she would never, ever give him herself again. The tension was no longer sexual or romantic. It was the tension of a wire pulled until it snaps. "I need to know what's next," the wind seemed to whisper, but neither of them had an answer. Only the dark, waiting silence of the end. The top of the spire of Aethelgard was not designed for the living. It was a platform of jagged black stone suspended in the churning grey sky, exposed to the full violence of the North Sea winds. There were no rails, no walls, just a sheer drop into the roiling loch 1,000 feet below. Hermione stood at the edge of the runed circle carved into the centre of the platform. The wind whipped her hair across her face, stinging her eyes, but she didn't blink. She felt numb. The cold that had settled in her chest the night before, when she found the letter, had solidified into a heavy, impenetrable block of ice. Draco stood 10 paces away, near the crumbling archway of the stairs. He was shouting something, but the gale tore the words from his mouth before they reached her. She didn't look at him. She couldn't. If she looked at him, at the sharp lines of his face, the grey eyes that had lied to her with such devastating precision, she would shatter, and she needed to be whole, for a few more minutes at least. "The inscription!" Draco yelled, stepping closer, fighting the wind. He pointed his wand at the central pedestal, a twisted pillar of iron that acted as the lightning rod for the ritual. "Read it, Granger. It's not a standard channeling ritual." Hermione looked down at the runes glowing faintly at her feet. They pulse with a sickly greenish light. Sanguis pro potentia, vita pro veritate, quod maximi momenti est, sacrificandum est. Blood for power, life for truth. That which is of greatest importance must be sacrificed. Hermione stared at the words, that which is of greatest importance. She felt a bitter, hollow laugh bubble up in her throat. Yesterday she might have thought that meant him. Yesterday she might have thought the bond between them was the most valuable thing she possessed. But that bond was a lie, a ministry-sanctioned hallucination. So, what did she have left? She looked at her hands. She thought of her empty flat in London. She thought of the sleepless nights, the phantom sounds of war, the crushing weight of being the brightest witch of her age, with no war to fight. She thought of the emptiness she had confessed to the mirror. She realized with a terrifying clarity that she had nothing left to lose. The only thing of value she had to offer the world was her magic, her life force. "I understand," she said. Her voice was calm, unnaturally steady against the shrieking wind. "You don't!" Draco was beside her now, grabbing her arm. His grip was hard, frantic. "It requires a sacrifice of value, Granger. We need an object, a totem, something we cherish." "I don't have anything like that," she said, pulling her arm from his grasp. She looked at him then. Her eyes were dry and dead. "And neither do you, unless you want to throw your vault key into the abyss." Draco flinched. The insult landed, but he didn't retreat. "Don't be stupid. We can figure this out. We can simulate a sacrifice. We can—" "There's no time for tricks, Malfoy. The alignment is now." She stepped into the circle. "Hermione, wait!" She raised her wand. She didn't aim it at the sky. She aimed it at her own chest. "I offer myself," she whispered. The wind stopped. The silence that slammed into the spire was absolute. It was the vacuum of a held breath. The runes at her feet flared blindingly white. The iron pillar hummed, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated in the marrow of her bones. The magic accepted the offer. It didn't want a trinket. It wanted the source. "No!" Draco screamed. He lunged for her, but an invisible wall of force threw him back. He hit the stone floor hard, sliding toward the edge. He scrambled up, ignoring the blood on his hands. Inside the circle, Hermione gasped. It wasn't painful at first. It felt like unspooling. Threads of golden light began to bleed out of her skin, rising up like smoke, swirling toward the iron pillar. She felt lighter, dizzy. Then the pain hit. It was a tearing sensation, deep in her core. The magic wasn't just taking her excess power, it was eating her life. It was drinking the color from her eyes, the heat from her blood. Her knees buckled. She fell to the stone, her wand clattering away. "Stop it!" Draco roared, pounding his fists against the invisible barrier. "Granger, stop it! You're killing yourself!" "It's necessary," she wheezed, her voice sounding like it was coming from a great distance. She looked at him through the shimmering wall of distortion. "You wanted compliance. You wanted the mission." "I don't care about the mission," Draco screamed, his voice cracking, raw with terror. "I don't care about the money. Stop!" Hermione smiled, a sad, broken expression. "But it's all I have to give." Her vision began to tunnel. The golden light streaming from her body turned red. The spire was feeding on her sorrow, on her resignation. It was a dark, hungry magic, and it was consuming her whole. Draco watched her fading. He saw her skin turn the color of parchment. He saw the life draining out of her amber eyes. She was dying. She was actually dying. And she was doing it because she believed she was worthless to him, because of his lie. The realization hit him like a physical blow, shattering the last remnants of his self-preservation. The glass fortress didn't just crack, it exploded. "That which is of greatest importance," Draco whispered, the words trembling on his lips. He looked at the dying girl in the circle. He looked at the vast, empty sky. And he knew. He didn't think about the ministry. He didn't think about his father, or the manor, or his pride. He raised his wand. He pointed it not at the barrier, but at his own chest. "Legilimens," he cast on himself. He tore open his own mind. He ripped down every shield, every wall, every carefully constructed deception he had built over a lifetime. He grabbed the raw, bleeding core of his own magic, the silver, chaotic storm of his emotions, and he projected it outward. He didn't attack the barrier. He overwhelmed it. He stepped forward. The barrier sizzled, burning his clothes, burning his skin. He didn't stop. He pushed through the rejection of the ritual, forcing his way into the circle by sheer brute force of will. "Draco," Hermione whispered, her eyes fluttering. She was barely conscious. He fell to his knees beside her. He didn't check her pulse. He grabbed her face with both hands, ignoring the way her skin burned with the discharging magic. "You are not the sacrifice, you idiot," he choked out, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the rain that had started to fall. "You are the point. You are the whole point." "I have nothing," she murmured. "You have me," he shouted, shaking her. "You have me. Do you hear me? I am yours. Every broken, wretched part of me." He pressed his forehead against hers. "Take it," he commanded the spire. "Take it all." He wasn't offering his life to the stone. He was offering his life to her. He poured his magic into her. It was a flood, a A torrent of silver light erupted from his skin, rushing into hers. It wasn't a gentle transfer, it was a collision. He gave her his strength to replace what she had lost. He gave her his memories, the truth of the forest, the fear in the cave, the awe he felt every time she looked at him. He forced her to see it. He forced her to feel the truth he had hidden in the undercroft. I love you. I love you. I love you. The thoughts slammed into her mind, undeniable and overwhelming. Hermione gasped, her eyes flying open. The golden light of her core met the silver of his. They didn't clash. They fused. The alchemical reaction was instantaneous. Gold and silver swirled together, creating a blinding, incandescent white light that outshone the sun. The spire groaned. The iron pillar turned white hot. The ritual demanded the thing of greatest value. Draco was giving up his control. Hermione was giving up her fear. They were giving each other the power to destroy one another and trusting that they wouldn't. "Draco!" Hermione cried out, the energy surging back into her veins, hot and fast. "I've got you!" he gritted out, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her against his chest. He was trembling violently. "I've got you! I'm not letting go!" The air around them screamed. The magic reached a critical mass. A column of pure white light exploded from the spire, shooting straight up into the dark clouds. It pierced the storm, blasting a hole through the grey to reveal the stars beyond. The shockwave flattened the rain for miles. The ley lines reconnected. The snap was felt across the entire island, a sudden, sharp intake of breath as the earth healed. But in the center of the white fire, Draco and Hermione didn't let go. They clung to each other as the world dissolved into light. Hermione buried her face in his neck, sobbing. Draco buried his face in her hair, holding her so tight his muscles spasmed. They were burning. They were drowning. They were being remade. Gradually, the blinding light faded. The roar of the magic subsided to a hum. They were still kneeling on the stone platform. The storm was gone. The sky above was clear, filled with a dizzying array of stars. Silence returned, but it wasn't the silence of death. It was the silence of peace. Draco slumped forward, his weight resting entirely on Hermione. He was breathing in harsh, ragged gasps. His coat was smoking. His hands were still tangled in her hair. Hermione held him. She felt the beat of his heart against her chest, frantic, erratic, alive. She felt the connection between them, the tether, now solid, unbreakable, and glowing with a warmth that defied the biting wind. She knew. She knew everything. The transfer of magic had left no secrets. She knew why he had lied. She knew how much he hated himself. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that he loved her more than his own life. "You idiot," she whispered, the tears falling onto his soot-stained cheek. "You absolute idiot." Draco lifted his head. He looked wrecked. His eyes were red-rimmed, heavy with exhaustion, but the walls were gone. There was no glass fortress, just a man, stripped bare. "I couldn't watch you go," he rasped, his voice barely a sound. I tried to be the villain, but I couldn't." "I know," she said. She reached up and touched his face. Her fingers were trembling. "I saw." Draco leaned into her touch, closing his eyes. "So what now?" he whispered. "The mission is done. The magic is fixed. You don't need me anymore." Hermione looked at him. She felt the hum of the tether, pulsing in time with her own blood. She felt the way her magic reached for his, curling around it like a vine. "The magic didn't fix us, Draco," she said softly. "It just showed us what was already there." She leaned in and pressed her lips to his. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It tasted of ozone, ash, and salt tears. It was desperate and claiming. Draco made a noise in the back of his throat, a sound of surrender, and kissed her back with a hunger that threatened to consume them both again. He pulled her closer, his hands gripping her waist, her back, her hair, as if trying to merge their physical forms the way their magic had merged. When they finally broke apart, breathless and dizzy, the reality of their situation began to settle. They were on top of a tower in the middle of nowhere. The ministry was waiting. The world was waiting. Draco looked at her, and the fear crept back into his eyes. Not fear of the magic, but fear of the morning. "They'll be coming for us," he said. "Ogden, the auras, to check the site." "Let them come," Hermione said, her chin lifting with a newfound strength. "Hermione," Draco said, his voice dropping. "The letter, the deal. I still have to face the Wizengamot. I'm still me." "And I'm still me," she said. She grabbed his hand, interlacing their fingers. The gold and silver sparks danced over their knuckles. "And we are not done." Draco looked at their joined hands. He looked at the horizon, where the first hint of dawn was beginning to bleed into the sky, a thin line of grey light. "I'm afraid," he admitted the final truth. "I'm afraid that when we go back down there, this will fade, that you'll come to your senses." Hermione squeezed his hand. "Then we don't go back down yet." She looked over the edge of the platform at the dark water below, then back at him. "We stay here," she whispered, "just for a little longer, until the sun comes up, until we're sure." Draco nodded slowly. He pulled her into his lap, wrapping his coat around both of them. They sat on the edge of the world, watching the darkness retreat. But as the first ray of sun hit the spire, Hermione felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The magic was stable, yes. But the letter in the Undercroft was still real. The world of politics and prejudice was still real. They had survived the magical storm. Now they had to survive the reality. Draco rested his chin on her shoulder, his eyes open, watching the sunrise with a grim determination. "I won't let them take you," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "And I won't let them take you," she vowed. But as the light grew brighter, exposing the scars on the land and the scars on their skin, the question hung heavy in the cold morning air. Could a love forged in the dark survive the light of day? The return to London was not a triumph. It was a collision. One moment they were standing on the edge of the world, wrapped in the raw elemental silence of the Highlands, their souls fused by ancient magic. The next, the portkey hooked behind their navels, jerking them through space and time, depositing them violently onto the polished black tiles of the Ministry of Magic's atrium. The noise hit them first. It was a physical wall of sound, the roar of the flu network, the clatter of shoes, the sudden, blinding explosion of camera flashes. Hermione stumbled, her knees still weak from the ritual. She reached out instinctively, her hand seeking his. She grabbed only air. Draco had already stepped back. He stood 3 feet away, his posture rigid, his face wiped clean of the vulnerability that had defined the last 48 hours. He was no longer the man who had wept on the mountaintop. He was Draco Malfoy, the accused, the pariah, standing before his judges. "Secure him!" a voice barked. Auras swarmed. 2 red-robed wizards flanked Draco, gripping his arms. They weren't gentle. "No!" Hermione cried, stepping forward, ignoring the dizziness that swept over her. "He cooperated. He saved the mission." Draco didn't look at her. He looked straight ahead, his eyes fixed on the golden statue of the Fountain of Magical Brethren. His jaw was set so tight the tendons strained against his pale skin. He was doing it again. He was building the glass fortress, but this time he wasn't locking himself in. He was locking her out, for her own protection. "Ms. Granger," Tiberius Ogden appeared from the throng, looking smug and officious in his pin-striped robes. "We have the readings. The ley lines are stabilizing rapidly. An extraordinary success." He gestured to a team of healers rushing toward her. "You need to be examined. The magical exhaustion must be severe." "I don't need a healer. I need to speak to him." Hermione gestured frantically at Draco, who was being led toward the lifts leading to the holding cells. Draco paused, just for a heartbeat. He turned his head, his grey eyes meeting hers across the chaotic atrium. The magical tether was gone. The golden hum that had connected them, allowing her to feel his fear and his love, had vanished the moment the mission ended. There was only silence between them now, a deafening, terrifying silence. In that silence, his eyes said one word: "Go." Then the lift doors closed, swallowing him into the dark underbelly of the ministry. Hermione stood frozen in the flashing lights of the press, the cheers of the ministry workers ringing in her ears like a mockery. She felt a phantom warmth on her palm where his hand had been hours ago. She had never felt more alone in her life. 3 days passed. 3 days of debriefings. 3 days of medical scans that confirmed her magical core was not only intact, but stronger than before, humming with a new silvery resonance she knew wasn't entirely her own. 3 days of silence from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. Hermione sat in her small flat in Muggle London. It was raining, a grey, miserable drizzle that streaked the windows. Her flat was warm, filled with books and the smell of tea, but it felt sterile. It felt too small and yet vast. She stared at the empty chair opposite her. She kept expecting to hear the rustle of a black coat or the sharp, dry wit of a comment about her choice of reading material. The doubt, which she had fought so hard on the spire, returned with a vengeance. Without the magic forcing them together, without the adrenaline of survival, what were they? Had it been real? Or had it been a hysteria induced by the ley lines? Draco had said he loved her during the ritual. She had felt the truth of it burn into her mind. But he had also walked away in the atrium without a fight. Perhaps he had come to his senses. Perhaps now that his vaults were unlocked and his freedom secured, he realized that a Malfoy and a Granger were a biological impossibility in the real world. A sharp tap on the window startled her. A tawny owl sat on the sill, soaking wet, a letter tied to its leg. It wasn't the heavy parchment of the Malfoy estate. It was a plain, cheap envelope. Hermione opened the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. She untied the letter with trembling fingers. It contained a single sentence, written in an elegant, jagged script she knew better than her own. Platform 9, 3-4. Midnight. The last train. The station was empty. The Hogwarts Express was not due to depart for months. The platform was merely a ghost of memories, smelling of coal dust and old magic. The enchanted ceiling mirrored the sky outside, dark, starless, and weeping rain. Draco was standing near the barrier, under the flickering light of a gas lamp. He was not wearing his mission clothes. He was wearing a violently expensive muggle suit, black and tailored, with a long charcoal overcoat. He looked like a prince in exile. He was leaning on a black cane. The injury to his leg from the forest evidently hadn't fully healed, or perhaps he just needed something to hold on to. Hermione walked toward him. The sound of her heels on the stone echoed in the vast, empty station. He turned. For a long moment, they just looked at the other. There was no magic humming between them, no golden light, no life or death stakes, just a man and a woman standing in the cold damp of London with 10 years of history and 3 days of silence between them. "You came," Draco said. His voice was quiet, rougher than she remembered. "You wrote," Hermione replied, clutching her bag. "You're free?" "Fully pardoned," he said, tapping the cane against the ground. "The Ogden deal held up. The vaults are open. I am, for all intents and purposes, a respectable citizen again." That's good. Is it?" He looked at the empty tracks. "I'm leaving, Hermione." The air left her lungs. "Leaving? Where?" "France. My mother is there. The manor. The manor is too loud. Too many ghosts. I can't live there anymore." He paused, his knuckles whitening on the head of the cane. "And I can't stay in London." "Why not?" "Because you are here." He turned to look at her fully, and the mask finally slipped. The agony in his eyes was raw. "I can't stay here and be the villain in the background of your life, Granger. I can't watch you be the golden girl while I'm the pardoned Death Eater who got lucky. It wouldn't work. The press, the public, they would tear you apart for being seen with me. And eventually, you would hate me for it." "You're deciding for me again," Hermione whispered, stepping closer. "Just like on the mountain. You're writing the ending before we've even started." "The story is over, Hermione. The magic is gone. The tether is broken." "Is it?" She stopped a foot away from him. She could smell his cologne, cedar, rain, and that unique, sharp scent of ozone that seemed to cling to him now. "I don't feel broken," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I feel rearranged. When you poured your magic into me, you didn't just fill a battery, Draco. You changed me. I see things differently now. I see you differently." "You see a project," he argued, his voice rising in frustration. "You see a broken thing you want to fix because you're Hermione Granger and you can't leave a puzzle unsolved." "I see the man who jumped in front of a curse for me," she countered, shouting back. "I see the man who gave up his pride to save my life. I see the man who knows exactly how I take my tea because he watched me for 2 days straight in a tent." She took another step. She was in his space now. "And I know you feel it too," she whispered. "I know you're not leaving because you want to. You're leaving because you're a coward. You're brave enough to die for me, but you're too scared to live with me." Draco stared down at her. His chest was heaving. He looked like he wanted to run, or scream, or fall to his knees. "It will be hard," he rasped. "It will be miserable. They will whisper. They will judge. My mother will disapprove. Your friends will be horrified." "I don't care," Hermione said. "The magic won't be there to make it easy. We won't feel each other's feelings. We'll have to talk. We'll have to trust without proof." "I know." "I'm difficult," he warned, a desperate final plea for her to be sensible. "I'm arrogant. I'm damaged. I wake up screaming." "I I wake up screaming too," she said softly. She reached out and took his hand, the one clenching the cane. She pried his fingers loose, one by one, until she could interlace her fingers with his. His hand was cold. Hers was warm. "Draco," she said, looking up into his storm-grey eyes. "The mission was to fix the magic. We did that. But the journey was about finding something real. I found it. Did you?" Draco looked at their joined hands. He looked at the stubborn set of her jaw, the curls escaping her hood, the fierce, unwavering intelligence in her amber eyes. He let out a breath that sounded like a surrender. "I found it," he whispered. He dropped the cane. It clattered loudly onto the stone, echoing through the empty station. He didn't need it. He reached out with his free hand and cupped her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, just as he had done in the forest. But this time, there was no hesitation, no magical coercion, no impending death. "I am not going to France," he murmured, leaning down. "Good," Hermione breathed. He kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss on the spire, which was a collision of desperate souls. This kiss was slow. It was deliberate. It was a question and an answer all at once. It tasted of rain and reality. It was grounded in the damp earth of London, far from the height of the magic, but it felt just as electric. Draco pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her waist, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He held on as if she were the only solid thing in a spinning world. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted against her skin. "I don't know how to be yours in the light." "We'll learn," Hermione said, running her hands down the back of his expensive coat, feeling the tension slowly drain from his shoulders. "We'll take it one day at a time. No magic, just us." Draco pulled back to look at her. A small, genuine smile touched his lips, rare and beautiful. "Scary," he noted. "Terrifying," she agreed. A whistle blew in the distance, a phantom train, or perhaps a real one on a different track. The clock on the wall struck midnight. The day was over. The mission was over. Draco retrieved his cane, but he didn't lean on it. He offered his arm to her, an old-fashioned, pure-blood gesture reclaimed for a new purpose. "Hermione," he said, testing the weight of her name in the quiet station. "Let's go home." "Which one?" she asked, taking his arm. Draco looked at the barrier leading back to Muggle London, back to the noise, the judgment, and the chaos. Then he looked at her. "Wherever you are," he said. They walked toward the barrier together. They didn't look back at the empty tracks. They walked out of the magical silence and into the noise of the real world, ready to face whatever came next. Not as enemies, not as partners bound by a spell, but as two broken people who had found that their jagged edges fit together perfectly. The journey in search of power had ended. The journey in search of a life had just begun.
It is worth thinking about how hard it is to find someone who shares your interest and their own, and I am glad that, at least in an alternative universe, this couple found peace and a chance for closeness, even if only for a short time, while we were listening to this story together. You are here with me, and that means a lot. It gives me strength to keep walking without stopping so you can enjoy new stories. Stories about happiness, about love, and about friendship. You are my strength.